The recreation chamber of Outpost Zeta-12 buzzed with the characteristic hum of off-duty Vantari military personnel. Blue-tinted light panels pulsed gently across the ceiling, mimicking the twin suns of the homeworld. 6 junior officers sprawled across the semi-organic comfort pods that adjusted to their 4-limbed bodies. Their exoskeletons, normally rigid during duty hours, had softened into their relaxed state, allowing them to drape themselves in postures that would have horrified their combat instructors. "Play it again," Lieutenant Draz Karani wheezed through his breathing slits, nearly choking on his fermented nectar drink. "This is the best human entertainment we've intercepted all cycle." The holographic projection in the center of the room flickered, displaying what the humans called a movie, one of thousands transmitted from their home planet. This particular piece showed diminutive gray beings with oversized heads fleeing from human military forces. The humans, armed with ridiculously primitive projectile weapons, somehow managed to defeat a species that supposedly possessed faster-than-light travel. "Look at those pathetic excuses for space travelers," Officer Jin Torax cackled, her dorsal spines vibrating with amusement. 4 fingers? How do they even grip anything properly? And those bulbous heads. What evolutionary path could possibly result in such inefficient design? And yet somehow, added specialist Morva Dents, these supposedly advanced beings are defeated by what are those? Chemical explosives propelled through metal tubes? The humans can't even manipulate gravitational fields. The group erupted in another round of laughter, as on screen, a human female somehow incapacitated an alien with a metal object to its cranium. "The best part," Karani continued between gasps, "is how the humans always portray themselves as the underdogs. As if any species capable of interstellar travel wouldn't simply sterilize their atmosphere from orbit. Or how about their obsession with direct physical contact?" Officer Brill Zentak chimed in. "What advanced species would risk biological contamination by engaging in proximity combat? It's absurd." Near the entrance to the chamber, partially obscured by the shadow of a support column, Commander Lorax Threll stood motionless. His weathered exoskeleton, bearing the distinctive patterning of a veteran who had undergone multiple regeneration cycles, reflected none of the ambient light. Unlike the younger officers, his breathing apparatus made no sound as he observed the entertainment and the reactions it provoked. The 6 decorative notches on his command ridge, a rarity among the Vantari military elite, caught occasional glints of light when he shifted his position. "And they always seem to think aliens want to study their reproductive systems," Torax snorted, "as if their biology holds some great mystery. We mapped their entire genetic structure 3 cycles ago. Completely unremarkable carbon-based life forms." Specialist Dents raised a drinking appendage. "To the humans, may they never discover what real space warfare looks like." The officers clicked their mandibles in agreement as they consumed more fermented nectar. Commander Threll's upper eye ridges narrowed almost imperceptibly as he continued to watch both the human entertainment and his junior officers. His primary grasping claw tightened around the ceremonial staff he always carried, a peculiar affectation that was tolerated due to his distinguished service record. The staff, unlike anything in standard Vantari design, featured unusual notches and burn patterns that no junior officer had ever dared to ask about. The human on screen delivered what was apparently meant to be a stirring speech about defending their planet against overwhelming odds, causing another eruption of mockery from the gathered officers. Still, Commander Threll remained silent, watching. Lieutenant Pax Morval, newly transferred from the prestigious Inner Ring Academy, was the first to notice Commander Threll's presence. Unlike the others, Morval's basic training had included studying the service records of decorated officers. While those records were heavily redacted, the impact of Threll's career was unmistakable. "Commander Threll," Morval called out, his voice cutting through the laughter. "You honor us with your presence. Would you care to join us?" The chamber fell silent. 5 sets of compound eyes swiveled toward the shadowed corner where Threll stood. His reputation preceded him 32 cycles of service, 12 major campaigns, and a mysterious 3-cycle gap in his record that coincided with the Empire's classified operations in the Sol sector. "I was merely passing by," Threll responded, his voice carrying the distinct gravelly quality of one who had breathed non-standard atmospheres without proper filtration. "Continue your entertainment." But Morval, emboldened by both ambition and fermented nectar, pressed further. "We were discussing human combat capabilities, or rather, their amusing lack thereof. Perhaps you could share your professional assessment? I understand you've had encounters with their kind." The other officers straightened their postures instinctively. Commander Threll rarely spoke of his experiences, and direct questions about his service history were considered poor form. "Yes, Commander," Kurani chimed in, oblivious to the sudden tension. "Tell us how pathetic they really are in combat. Their entertainment depicts them as resourceful warriors, but we all know that's just their primitive fantasy." Threll remained motionless for 11 full heartbeats in uncomfortable silence by Vantari standards. Then, with deliberate movements that belied his advanced age, he approached the gathered officers. The ceremonial staff in his right claw tapped against the floor in an irregular rhythm. "You move aside," he commanded, and the junior officers scrambled to create space in their seating arrangement. Threll lowered himself into a comfort pod, which immediately adjusted to his larger frame. "You find humans amusing," he stated rather than asked, his upper eyes focusing on the paused holographic image while his lower set surveyed the officers. "You believe they pose no serious threat to our military superiority, that their understanding of warfare is primitive." "Well, yes," Officer Zentak replied, mandibles twitching nervously. "Look at their technology. They barely managed controlled fusion a century ago. Their space vessels still rely on reaction mass. Their weapons are inefficient and crude." Commander Threll's breathing apparatus emitted a sound that might have been a sigh or a suppressed laugh. He ran a claw along one of the unusual burn marks on his staff, seemingly lost in thought. "I was once stationed on Outpost Sigma 7, he began unexpectedly. "Before most of you had emerged from your juvenile shells, before the Treaty of Proxima." The officers exchanged surprised glances. The Treaty of Proxima was rarely mentioned in casual conversation. It was the official designation for the non-aggression pact between the Vantari Empire and the Sol System Alliance, a diplomatic arrangement that many found puzzling given the obvious technological disparity between the species. "What was on Sigma 7, Commander?" Morval asked, his voice quieter now. Threll's exoskeleton shifted color slightly, an involuntary reaction that veterans often displayed when accessing combat memories. "The truth," he said simply. Commander Threll deactivated the holographic projection with a casual flick of his secondary appendage. The chamber's ambient lighting adjusted automatically, casting the gathered officers in a deeper blue hue that accentuated the serious turn of the conversation. 27 cycles ago, I served as second tactical officer aboard the dominance vessel Inevitable Conquest," Threll began, his voice dropping to a register that forced the junior officers to lean forward. "We were assigned to what Command classified as a Standard Resource Acquisition Planet designation HD 209,458 billion. Initial scans indicated abundant rare minerals and suitable conditions for a processing outpost. No signs of advanced civilization. Routine mission parameters." Threll manipulated his personal data device, and the room's holographic projector displayed a massive Vantari warship nearly 4 kilopaces in length, bristling with graviton cannons and dimensional disruptors. "The Inevitable Conquest was the pride of our fleet. Crew complement of 8,000, automated defense systems capable of tracking and neutralizing up to 12,000 incoming projectiles simultaneously, and a hull composed of self-repairing nano-mesh. Our ground force included 200 Annihilator-class combat walkers and 500 elite shock troops." Lieutenant Morval nodded appreciatively. Even by modern standards, such a force was impressive. We established orbital dominance and deployed preliminary resource extraction units, Threll continued. Standard procedure. 3 planetary rotations into the operation. Our long-range sensors detected unusual energy signatures from the system's asteroid belt. A command dismissed them as natural radiation fluctuations. Threll's breathing apparatus made an uncharacteristic clicking sound. They weren't natural. The humans had concealed their vessels within hollowed-out asteroids. Primitive technology, yes, but effective. Our sensors were calibrated to detect engine emissions, energy weapons charging, or artificial gravity fields, not the absence of expected radiation patterns from what appeared to be natural objects. The commander paused, taking a slow sip from a flask he extracted from his utility compartment. They attacked without warning. 47 vessels. Each barely an eighth the size of the inevitable conquest. We actually laughed when they appeared on our tactical displays. Their ships had no shielding technology we could detect. Their weapons were primarily kinetic metal projectiles accelerated to significant fractions of light speed, but nothing our defenses couldn't handle. Threll's exoskeleton darkened noticeably as he continued. Then they did something unexpected. Instead of engaging at maximum range as our battle doctrines predicted, they accelerated directly toward us. Suicidal, we thought. Our automated defense systems targeted their lead vessels and destroyed 17 of them within moments. The junior officers exchanged satisfied glances. This was more like the outcome they expected. But the debris, Threll's voice faltered slightly. The debris from those destroyed ships wasn't random. They had packed their forward sections with a particulate material, refined iron dust, primarily. But when our weapons vaporized their ships, that material dispersed in a precise pattern, creating a cloud that disrupted our sensor capabilities. Primitive. Effective. Officer Thorax's mandibles clicked in confusion. But surely our secondary systems could compensate for. They didn't give us time, Threll interrupted sharply. The remaining human vessels altered their approach vectors in ways that defied tactical logic. Some accelerated past us at dangerously close range, the others decelerated abruptly. Several appeared to suffer catastrophic engine failures and tumbled toward our position. Threll's ceremonial staff tapped rhythmically against the floor. Our tactical AI couldn't predict their movements because they weren't following any recognizable doctrine. What we later realized was that they were manually controlled individual human pilots making intuitive decisions rather than following programmed response patterns. The holographic display shifted to show the inevitable conquest surrounded by smaller vessels moving in chaotic patterns. Then they deployed their actual weapons. Not the kinetic projectiles we expected, but thousands of self-propelled devices that attached themselves to our hull. Each contained what we later identified as a shaped explosive charge, primitive chemical explosives, yes, but positioned precisely at junctures in our nanomesh hull structure. Threll's voice had grown quieter, forcing the officers to strain to hear him. They detonated simultaneously. The individual explosions were insignificant, barely enough to register on our damage control systems. But the cumulative effect, he trailed off. The cumulative effect? Prompted Lieutenant Morville. The inevitable conquest, pride of the Vantari fleet, lost 78% of its offensive capabilities in less than 1/6 of a time unit, Threll stated flatly. 3,412 crew members died when sections of the ship decompressed. Our ground forces, already deployed to the planet's surface, were cut off from orbital support. The recreation chamber had grown completely silent. Even the ambient life support systems seemed to have quieted to hear the commander's tale. That was my first encounter with humans, Threll concluded. It would not be my last. Specialist Dents broke the silence first. But Commander, that was merely one engagement. Surely our forces regrouped and eliminated the human threat. Threll's compound eyes shifted focus, studying each junior officer in turn. The earlier mockery had vanished from their postures. Good. They were beginning to understand. After the initial attack, we expected the humans to press their advantage, Threll continued. They didn't. Instead, they retreated to the asteroid belt. Our surviving command structure interpreted this as fear evidence that their attack had been a desperate gamble with no strategic follow-through. He manipulated his data device again, and the holographic display showed the aftermath, a damaged but still operational Vantari warship surrounded by debris. High Command dispatched 3 additional dominance vessels to our position, the unquestioned authority, the decisive victory, and the eternal supremacy. Together, we would punish the humans for their insolence. Standard doctrine. Lieutenant Karani nodded, some confidence returning to his bearing. 4 dominance vessels would be unstoppable. That's precisely what we believed, Threll agreed. We established a search pattern and began methodically destroying asteroids where we detected unusual composition readings. Very thorough. Very by the manual. His staff tapped against the floor 3 times. For 14 time units, we encountered no resistance. Then our deep space communication arrays began experiencing interference. Subtle, at first minor data corruption, transmission delays. Our technicians diagnosed it as background radiation anomalies. They were wrong. Threll leaned forward, his exoskeleton creaking slightly. The humans had been studying our communication protocols and developed a method to introduce false data packets into our secure channels. Not enough to be immediately detected, but sufficient to create confusion between our vessels. Coordinates shifted by tiny increments. Sensor readings showed phantom anomalies. Targeting solutions became unreliable. Officer Zentak's breathing slits fluttered with agitation. But our encryption algorithms are based on quantum state verification. It would be impossible for a less advanced species to. They didn't break our encryption, Threll interrupted. They simply overwhelmed our communication bandwidth with junk data from thousands of small, pre-automated transmitters they had seeded throughout the asteroid field during our methodical search. Another primitive but effective tactic. The commander's voice took on a tone the junior officers hadn't heard before, something almost resembling admiration. While we were struggling to maintain formation cohesion, they launched their second phase. Not a direct assault, but a series of small, seemingly inconsequential strikes. They targeted our external sensor arrays with precision attacks, then disappeared before we could respond effectively. They deployed devices that attached to our hulls and emitted radiation on the exact frequencies our internal communication systems used, creating persistent interference. Threll's upper eyes narrowed. Most disturbingly, they began broadcasting audio and visual transmissions directly to our crew. They had somehow obtained personnel data names, assignments, personal histories. They sent individualized messages to key officers, containing details that only someone with access to our secure databases should have known. Psychological warfare, Lieutenant Morville whispered. Precisely. They created uncertainty, paranoia. Some crew members became convinced we had a traitor in our midst. Others began questioning command decisions. Morale deteriorated rapidly. The gathered officers exchanged uneasy glances. The atmosphere in the recreation chamber had changed dramatically from the light-hearted mockery of earlier. But the most ingenious aspect, Threll continued, was how they modified their inferior technology to exploit our weaknesses. They couldn't match our graviton cannons, so they developed projectiles that would detonate just outside our defensive perimeter, creating gravitational microdistortions that confused our targeting systems. They couldn't penetrate our nanomesh hull directly, so they developed compounds that would interfere with the self-repair functionality instead. Threll's breathing apparatus emitted a sound that might have been a chuckle. They even captured some of our drone units, reprogrammed them with simplified control systems, and sent them back as Trojans. We detected the crude reprogramming easily, of course, but while our security teams were focused on the obvious threat. The humans used the distraction to insert much more sophisticated infiltration packages elsewhere. The commander fell silent for a moment, lost in memory. I came to respect their unpredictability, he finally admitted. Where Vantari military doctrine prizes efficiency and overwhelming force, humans seem to value adaptation and improvisation. They rarely made the same move twice. They learned from each encounter and adjusted their tactics accordingly. It was unsettling. Commander Threll manipulated his data device once more, and the holographic display shifted to show a blue-green planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. After our third major engagement with human forces, High Command authorized a comprehensive study of their homeworld. What we discovered explains much about their unusual capabilities, Threll said, his voice taking on the measured cadence of a tactical briefing. Earth is, by galactic standards, a death world. Lieutenant Morville's exoskeleton paled slightly. A death world. But their atmospheric composition is primarily nitrogen and oxygen. Standard Class M habitability. Yes, Threll agreed. But consider these factors. Their planetary gravity is 1.3 times Vantari standard. Their atmospheric pressure fluctuates wildly across the surface. Temperature variations can exceed 100 degrees in a single location over the course of their orbital cycle. Approximately 70% of their surface is covered in corrosive dihydrogen monoxide. Those conditions sound challenging but not extreme, Officer Torax interjected, though with notably less confidence than before. Threll's breathing apparatus emitted a short, sharp sound. What makes Earth truly remarkable is its biological diversity and competitive evolutionary history. The planet hosts over 8 million distinct species, many of which evolved specifically to kill other organisms. Humans developed on a world where virtually everything was trying to eliminate them. The commander brought up new imagery, human historical records, showing primitive specimens fighting enormous predators with simple spears. While we Vantari evolved in the balanced ecosystem of our homeworld, where cooperation and specialization were the primary evolutionary drivers, humans come from a place where constant threat adaptation was necessary for survival. Their distant ancestors were persistence hunters, chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, a strategy that required extraordinary endurance. Officer Zentak's mandibles clicked nervously. But their physical capabilities are inferior to ours in every measurable way. Their musculature is less efficient, their sensory apparatus limited, their exoskeletons non-existent. That perceived weakness is precisely what we underestimated, Threll countered. Their internal skeleton allows for exceptional recovery from injury. A Vantari with a cracked exoskeleton is permanently impaired. Humans routinely survive broken bones, which then heal often stronger than before. The commander brought up medical imagery that caused several officers to avert their secondary eyes. Their pain tolerance exceeds ours by factors that our researchers initially refused to believe. Vantari nervous systems shut down after sustaining injuries that would constitute approximately 15% physical damage. Humans can continue functioning, fighting, problem-solving, even engaging in complex tasks while experiencing physical trauma that would incapacitate any Vantari. The gathered officers shifted uncomfortably in their comfort pods. Most disturbing of all is their strange relationship with microbial life, Threll continued. Their bodies host trillions of microorganisms in a symbiotic relationship. Their immune systems are in a constant state of warfare against pathogens. They developed on a world teeming with biological threats, which has made them remarkably resistant to biotoxins that would devastate our population. Lieutenant Kurani's breathing had become noticeably rapid. Are you suggesting they're immune to our standard neutralization protocols? Not immune, Threll clarified, but substantially more resistant than our tactical simulations predicted. The standard Vantari biotoxin that should render an area uninhabitable for 20 time cycles, humans can recover and return to the area in as little as 2 cycles. Their cellular repair mechanisms are extraordinarily aggressive. The recreation chamber had grown cold, or perhaps it was just the creeping realization affecting the junior officers. They were beginning to understand why information about humans was so carefully controlled by high command. 7 cycles after our first encounter, I had been promoted to Fleet Tactical Commander, Threll continued, his voice growing softer yet somehow more intense. We had adapted our strategies based on previous encounters. Our vessels now maintained irregular communication patterns to counter human interference. Our hull designs had been modified. Our tactical AIs reprogrammed to anticipate unpredictable behavior patterns. The commander's ceremonial staff tapped against the floor in a rhythm that seemed to match the cadence of his words. I command authorized Operation Decisive Terminus. 12 dominance vessels, 30 support cruisers, and over 100 drone carriers assembled at the edge of the Sol system. I was given command of the Vanguard Force. Our objective was simple: neutralize the human military capability once and for all. The holographic display showed the impressive Vantari Armada arranged in an attack formation that the officers recognized from their tactical training. We detected human defensive positions around their outer planets, predictable based on our previous encounters. We deployed countermeasures for their known tactics and began our advance toward Earth. Our simulations gave us a 94.3% probability of success. Threll's breathing apparatus made a sound like a bitter laugh. What we didn't anticipate was that the humans had been preparing for this moment. They had studied our adaptations and developed counters to our counters. But more importantly, they had embraced what we perceived as their greatest weakness, their fragility. The commander manipulated his data device, showing a new tactical display of smaller human ships moving in what appeared to be chaotic patterns between the Vantari formation and Earth. They deployed thousands of single-pilot vessels, tiny craft, barely large enough to contain a human body, and minimal life support systems. No significant weapons, minimal shielding. We initially classified them as surveillance drones. That was a critical error. Threll zoomed in on one of the small human ships. Each vessel contained not just a pilot, but a specialized payload designed for a specific target within our fleet. Many carried what appeared to be rudimentary fusion devices, technology we had dismissed as too unstable for tactical applications. Lieutenant Morville leaned forward. They used unstable fusion weapons? The casualty rate among their own forces must have been catastrophic. That's what we assumed would deter them, Threll agreed. And we were wrong. The humans had accepted, even embraced, the near certainty of death. Their vessels deliberately triggered proximity alarms, drawing fire from our automated defense systems. When destroyed, their fusion cores didn't simply explode, they collapsed in precisely calculated patterns that created localized spatial distortions. Specialist Dense's breathing slits fluttered rapidly. They weaponized their own deaths. Yes, Threll said simply. But the true turning point came from a single human vessel. Designation Heroic Sacrifice, under the command of a human called Admiral Leora Kane. The display showed a slightly larger human ship maneuvering through the chaos of battle toward the Vantari flagship. Her vessel had sustained critical damage but remained operational. Our tactical analysis indicated it would be neutralized within moments. Instead, Admiral Kane executed a maneuver that defied our understanding of human capabilities. She directed her damaged vessel directly toward the dimensional phasing array of our command ship, our most heavily defended system. Threll's upper eyes closed briefly. In the final moments before impact, I received a direct communication from Admiral Kane. I expected threats, or perhaps some emotional human gesture. Instead, she spoke 5 words that I still cannot fully decipher. See you on the other side. The commander's exoskeleton darkened with the memory. The heroic sacrifice collided with our phasing array as its fusion core entered catastrophic failure. The resulting reaction created a cascading dimensional fracture that disabled not just our flagship, but 7 other dominance vessels linked to the same tactical network. 27,000 Vantari military personnel lost in an instant to a single human's decision. The recreation chamber remained silent for nearly 30 heartbeats after Commander Threll finished recounting the final battle. The junior officers sat motionless, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. Operation Decisive Terminus was classified as a strategic redeployment in official records, Threll finally continued. High Command determined that widespread knowledge of what actually occurred would be detrimental to Imperial morale. The truth remains restricted to those with ultraviolet clearance or higher. Lieutenant Morville's voice was barely audible. Then why are you telling us, Commander? Threll's compound eyes fixed on the young officer. Because you need to understand why we allow human entertainment to circulate freely within our networks. Why we permit, even encourage the perception that humans are primitive and ineffective warriors. The commander's ceremonial staff tapped once, hard against the floor. The Treaty of Proxima wasn't a generous gesture from a technologically superior civilization, as your education modules undoubtedly taught you. It was the best outcome our negotiators could achieve after the High Command calculated the projected casualties of continued conflict. Officer Zentak's breathing had become shallow and rapid. Are you suggesting the Empire feared defeat? The Empire feared extinction, Threll corrected flatly. Our models predicted that full-scale war with humanity would result in unacceptable losses, potentially exceeding 60% of our military capacity before achieving victory. And that assumed we could maintain our technological advantage, which our intelligence services doubted. Humans adapt too quickly. The commander leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The fictional portrayal of themselves as underdogs fighting against superior alien forces? That's not their fantasy. It's their warning. They know exactly what they're capable of, and they're telling anyone who's listening. Threll rose from the comfort pod, towering over the junior officers who remained frozen in place. Remember this, when you laugh at their primitive weapons and crude tactics. Remember what Admiral Kane said before she single-handedly crippled our fleet. See you on the other side. They don't fear death the way we do. They've evolved to embrace it when necessary. The commander moved toward the exit, then paused. Pray to whatever deities you acknowledge that the Treaty of Proxima holds. Because if full-scale war erupts again, it won't be a matter of victory or defeat. It will be a question of whether anything remains of Vantari civilization afterward. As Threll departed, a profound silence settled over the recreation chamber. The holographic projector still displayed a paused image from the human entertainment that had seemed so amusing just a short time ago. None of the young officers reached to resume it. The recreation chamber remained silent for several minutes after Commander Threll's departure. The junior officers exchanged uncomfortable glances, their exoskeletons shifting through various stress indication patterns. Lieutenant Morville finally rose from his comfort pod and approached the doorway where Threll had exited. The commander's heavy footsteps had long since faded, but Morville hesitated before triggering the door sensor. "Commander," he called out, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. Threll reappeared, silhouetted in the corridor's ambient lighting. "Lieutenant, what should we do with this information? We're not cleared for ultraviolet intelligence." The commander studied Morville for a moment before responding. "Respect them. From a distance. Appreciate their entertainment for what it truly is, a cultural declaration of their capabilities wrapped in the guise of fiction. And hope that you never find yourself facing them across a battlefield." With that, Threll departed, his ceremonial staff tapping an irregular rhythm that faded into silence. The junior officers remained motionless until Officer Torax finally reached for the holographic controls. The human entertainment resumed playing, but the laughter that had filled the chamber earlier was notably absent. On screen, A human character delivered a passionate speech about peace while preparing weapons for a last stand against overwhelming odds. Officer Zentek adjusted the translation settings, listening more carefully to the nuances of the human dialogue. Notice how they always portray themselves as reluctant warriors. Specialist Dents observed quietly. They claim to value peace while displaying extraordinary proficiency in combat. A warning indeed, Lieutenant Karani murmured. In the flickering light of the holographic display, the officers watched with new understanding as the fictional humans on screen defeated their alien adversaries through unexpected tactics and personal sacrifice, exactly as Commander Threll had described in his harrowing account. The camera angle in the human entertainment shifted momentarily to a background detail none of them had noticed earlier: a document on a wall labeled Treaty of Proxima Centauri, with signatures in both human and Vantari script. Lieutenant Morville leaned forward, mandibles clicking in surprise. Pause and magnify Sector 4. The entertainment froze, zooming in on the treaty document. There, in perfectly rendered Vantari military cipher, was a line of text too accurate to be coincidental, in recognition of mutual capabilities and respect. This entertainment was produced 3 cycles after the actual treaty was signed, Morville said softly, the details of which remain classified. A chill permeated the recreation chamber as the implications became clear. The humans weren't just creating fiction, they were sending a message. And they knew exactly who would be watching. Officer Zentak restarted the entertainment from the beginning, and this time they watched in silence, the laughter replaced by a newfound respect tinged with quiet dread.